This is a brief overview of the units 7 and 8 of the TKT in listening and speaking. When people learn a language, listening is the first thing they do. And they try to listen at the spoken language. They see if they can understand words in order to relate it to their world knowledge. They listen to different types of text and understanding of them, the speech and accents also, and they also listen for some skills. Listening is the first way of attempting to learn and understand a language. Children or babies have to listen to the native language for a year before they can create their first utterance. So listening is a very important skill to learn that most teachers don't really teach it. One of the things that we need to teach students in listening is listening for communication so they can respond to a dialogue, listening for pleasure, listening for information so they'll be able to pull out the key facts in order to understand what's going on in the conversation, and also listening to learn, listening for education. There are different types of interaction patterns for listening, and they have to be able to distinguish one from the other because that will help them understand what is going around them. And these are conversations, stories, announcements, songs, instructions, lectures, and advertisements. Now, listening can be tricky because listening is hearing a temporary information that goes with the wind. They listen to the spoken language English, which has stress and intonations. It has connected speech in order to understand what the next sentence is going to be about. It also involves body language and gestures and facial expressions. And it doesn't have really a well-organized fluid of thought. And sometimes the vocabulary is known and unknown, and the grammatical structure. So listening is a complex thing because it's temporary. It's temporary based on the person who keeps talking. The moment I stop talking, there's no more listening. While the written language is quite different because it's permanent. It doesn't change. It will always be there. The letters, the words, the thoughts, the organization. You can analyze the vocabulary and the grammar. And what we do with listening is that we do it at the moment, at that second. We understand or we don't understand. There are two different types of listening, which is intensive listening and extensive listening. And listening for a gist or global understanding, listening for specific information, and for attitude. But intense listening focuses on listening skills in the classroom to study the way English is spoken. So you're looking for grammatical structure, you're looking at word use, while extensive listening is about pleasure. It's about listening outside the classroom, it's about listening about music, it's listening about daily conversations without the teacher's intervention. If you travel to a country and you don't speak French and you're walking around, you're trying to communicate with people, you're doing extensive listening because you're trying to understand what's going around in your environment. While intensive listening in the French class is to learn French. Listening for gist or global understanding, that is when your full attention is not on the listening, but you're looking to see more or less what the topic is about. Usually, if you're sitting in a restaurant and you start hearing something, people talking to you next to the table, and all of a sudden they say a word that grabs your attention, you might actually lean in forward to find out what they're talking about, and that would be listening for gist. Listening for specific information, think about going in the train station and they're announcing the next train to go to Mexico City to Houston will be leaving in 5 minutes. Well, you're going to be listening to find out when you have to get on that train or not. And one of the things about listening is that you want to infer attitude. You're going to find out how they're feeling, if they're feeling sad or they're feeling happy, trying to read the emotions of the person. Okay, so how do we teach listening? Well, the most important thing is to expose your students with different audios of different ranges of accents, especially of the same language you're teaching. For example, if we're doing English, what they're going to be listening to is an American accent. But they also should be listening to Australian and British and South African, so they can actually distinguish the different accents and be able to understand them. Another way of improving listening strategies is to teach key vocabulary words before listening to an audio or to a video on tape. Also, having them practice true and false questions, where you say something orally and they have to indicate if it's true or false. Have them identify different types of sounds, remember phonemes or sounds, and have them work on minimal pairs, word stress, and sentence stress. Because one of the things that is correlated with listening is also speaking. So by helping them identify word stress or sentence stress, they are going to accustom their ear of how to distinguish different words, but they'll also help them speak those different words if they're aware of those elements. Now we've been talking about listening. Now let's talk about speaking. Speaking, you want to give a message. You want to communicate. You want to be understood. And the way that you speak also explains the message that you're trying to do. So intonation is so important. So if I change my intonation and I say, my name is Mary. My name is Mary? My name is Mary. My name is Mary. Just by the way of the stress and intonations that I make, you can tell how I'm feeling. Speaking involves asking for clarifications. If you don't understand what the person is saying, you want to ask them to repeat it. Monitoring is when you listen to yourself to make sure that you're saying what you want to say, and if you're not saying it correctly, you're going to repeat yourself over and over again until you feel that your message is clear. Appropriate register talks about, remember, if being polite or slang or formal language, colloquial language, what language are you using for the audience that you're speaking to? Exponents are the actual words that you're saying. So what do you want to say? Paraphrasing is when you repeat in your own words what you listen to. And I just hesitated. Hesitate is when you stop talking and then you pause. Connected speech is when you use words in order to flow one idea to the next. For example, isn't a connected speech. Self-correction, you hear me do that all the time on the videos. When I'm all of a sudden I'm saying a word and I don't want to say it, then I say it again, or I change the word. Interactive strategy, that means turn taking. That means that you're talking to someone, you have to let them speak, stop, listen to their response, and speak again. Gestures are any type of body movements that you do while you're speaking, and facial expression is any movements that you use with your muscles as you're speaking to show emotion or ideas. The silent period is where the students need time to listen and absorb the language. The silent period is where the student is not capable to do an utterance because they don't know how to pronounce the sounds or move the sounds in order for them to create. Usually the silent period can be a while. So when you're talking to someone and you're asking them to repeat and they don't do it, they're probably in the silent period. Give them time to absorb the language. Now let's talk about teaching speaking. A control practice is when you have a set structure of grammar you want the students to practice and produce with different contexts. Okay, so if we're going to be doing control practice and I want them to learn about actions, I'm going to have everybody jumping up and down and say, I am jumping. And then I'm going to have them put on some music and I'm going to say, okay, let's put some dance. And I'm going to say, I am dancing. You are providing a structure for them to learn. A drill is when you have them practice it over and over and over again. Learn by heart, usually it's something that it's a dramatic play where they have to memorize the dialogue and act it out, or they memorize a poem and they have to present it. Information gap activities is when you as a teacher provide most of the language and then the students have to fill in the gap. For example, I would say, hi, my name is, and then everybody would have to say their name. So everybody would repeat with me and say, hi, my name is, and then they would say John, Ann, Mary, Tom, and then we would continue. So I am, and then they would say 8, 7 years old. So you give them most of the information and they just fill it in. Working in project solving and project work at parent work is always a great way to promote speaking, as long as you have structures in place for them to use the target language and they don't go back and speak their native language. Teachers who model their language, for example, if a child says something incorrectly and says, I see 2 mouses, then you're going to model the language and say, I see 2 mice, and then you have them repeat it. So they learn the right structure and the right way to say things. And of course, speaking is related to reading, writing, and listening, so you want to incorporate all of those when you're teaching speaking strategies. And this is the end of the brief review of speaking and listening of the TKT.